Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be asking and answering the question, what graphics card should you buy right now? We're going to be hopping around between different resolutions and discussing the different graphics card options, at least for the new cards that have become available so far here in 2016, and also project about what we think will be coming in the future in 2017 and also later on in the year. We recently got that announcement of the new Titan X, or Titan XP as a lot of people are calling it, the Windows XP of graphics cards, certainly. That's like a $1,200 graphics card, really not a gaming card. NVIDIA's never really advertised their Titan cards as gaming cards, but nevertheless, that doesn't stop people from going out there and spending ridiculous amounts of money on them so that they can have the biggest EP on the block and say, hey boys, look, I've got 4 Titan X's, even though NVIDIA doesn't really support SLI beyond 2A anymore. I still got 4 of them because reasons. Basically, that's it, to show that your bank account was large enough to accommodate all of these cards. But we're going to start off things in the world of reality at 1080p, where most people are probably going to be gaming at, given, Steam charts and surveys, what people are actually gaming at. Most of them is at 1080p, even though 1440 has started to become more affordable options with graphics cards like the 1060 and the RX 480. We're starting things off at 1080p, 60 FPS, where they've got the 4GB RX 480, which you can pick up for around $200 here in the US, and it does seem to be fairly reasonably priced, given the type of performance that you could get on a card like that, playing games at even, 1080p ultra settings, even with some anti-aliasing turned on there and maybe even some light 1440p gaming. The RX 480 4GB does kind of seem to be in a class of its own right now, around the $200 price point. AMD also has the 460 and 470, is kind of going after that 1080p high settings area, but if you're more on the 1080 ultra side, you might want to look at the 4GB RX 480 at around that $200 price point. If you're wanting to push that up further past, up to 1080, beyond 60 hertz, like 144 hertz gaming, then you may want to look more towards the 8GB model, the RX 480, which will give you probably a few FPS more there, or something like the GTX 1060, which is proven to be better, at least in DirectX 11 gaming. The 480 is showing more promise for future stuff with the DirectX 12 and Vulkan testing that we did here recently on the channel. Put a link to that down in the description below in case you guys did miss that video. But we're going to talk here about the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. They are right around that $250 to $300 price point, depending on which card you're able to get. Most of the 1060s seem to be closer to the $300 price range, while the 480 8GB are more around the $250. But that depends really what country you're in as well, because looking over in countries like Germany, it's a complete flip-flop, where over there with the 8GB RX 480s, they're paying more than they would for the GTX 1060s, coming in at around 320 and 280 euros respectively, depending on which model you look at. But it seems pretty consistent that the RX 480s actually cost more there than the GTX 1060s. And I believe Brian said that over in Japan, that seems to be a similar case as well, where the AMD RX 480s are a little bit more dear compared to the NVIDIA counterparts. So with the 1440p gaming, though, it did seem like the GTX 1060 was the stronger card right now, although the RX 480 showed a lot of promise in those future titles and DirectX 12 testing for the games that were well optimized enough for it. And given, GCN architecture and how AMD's drivers developed for that over time, the RX 480 may end up being the better card in the long run, but the GTX 1060 appears to be the better card right now. So it really comes down to, are you the type of gamer who wants to be upgrading every generation or every 2 generations, in which case then NVIDIA might be the better side for you to go with there. Whereas if you're someone that maybe likes to buy a card that lasts you 3 to 5 years, and you're coming from a card that you've already been using for 3 to 5 years and you want to get the next one that's going to last you for that same amount of time, then the RX 480 8GB might be a better option there, because you're getting more video memory and you're also potentially getting better driver support in the long run compared to NVIDIA, who almost seems to just completely forget about their previous generations. And it almost seems like, at least, this is kind of like tinfoil hat time, but it almost appears like they kind of go back and try to butcher their previous cards just to make the newer cards look better. But that is, like I said, that's my tinfoil hat theory. We'll have to wait a couple months and then go back and test Maxwell and see how much of a nerf they got, if they do the same thing that they did with Fermi last time around. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that. But as I said, right now, if I'm sitting here waiting to buy a card for 1440p, I would probably lean towards the GTX 1060 if I can afford that $300 price range. But the 8GB RX 480, again, that's going to be better in the long run. And realistically, you could get that with like a $400 FreeSync monitor for about the cost of just a 1440 G-Sync monitor. So that might be a better option there if you're thinking about doing a FreeSync option, 1440, 144 hertz monitor, like the Pixio one that I recently reviewed, paired up with the RX 480, then that could be the better option for you as well. There's definitely a lot of variables that come into play with picking a graphics card, and if I didn't make this as clear cut for you as you like, I'm sorry. And if there's maybe a question that you have that I didn't answer here, I will do so down in the comments below. So moving on from there, we have the GTX 1070 and 1080 are kind of sitting at the top right now on their own, as AMD doesn't really have anything to contend directly with the 1070 and the 1080 until we see Vega in 2017. But then by that time, we're also expecting to see NVIDIA maybe coming out with something in Volta. So we'll have to see what comes next year. But right now, the 1070 and 1080 are kind of sitting at the top of the heap on their own, with the 1080 shaping up to be really an amazing card, I would say, for 4K. Ultra-wide resolutions and maybe 1440p 144 hertz gaming, while the GTX 1070 at just under $400 is really not that far off of the GTX 1080 in terms of performance, and I personally don't think that the 1080 is necessarily worth it for the amount of the increase in performance you're getting there versus the $400 GTX 1070, because the 1070, from the testing that I've seen, I haven't been able to get hands-on with it, but in the testing that I've seen, it's able to, handle 1440p gaming very well, and also even dip its toes into the ultra-wide 3440 by 1440, and still being able to maintain over 60 FPS in many of the titles. I mean, you're going to struggle a little bit in things like Witcher 3, but for the most part, in games out there like Overwatch, once that eventually gets actual ultra-wide support, something like a 1070 should be able to handle it really well. So it kind of depends on what games you end up playing here. But I think the 1070 is going to be kind of the sweet spot card, for like 1440 and ultra wide, which I think most enthusiasts are probably looking to get into if they're coming from 1080p 4K. You're definitely looking at the GTX 1080, which I've been gaming on since I got one a couple of months ago, almost exclusively in 4K, and all the games that I played, it just absolutely dominates in 4K. Once again, hate to bring it up, but Witcher 3, that game it did struggle with in 4K. I had to knock it down to 1440p, but Overwatch, I've been playing a ton of Overwatch. I've also played Battlefield 1 quite extensively in the closed alpha, and the GTX 1080 just crushes those games in 4K without breaking a sweat. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. I will be down in the comments to answer your guys' questions about graphics cards. I figured this would be a good place to kind of do that. It's hard to kind of get all of your thoughts across on so many different resolutions with so many different graphics cards, all in one video. But I tried to do the best that I could to try just kind of give a blanket overview of what I've seen in my own personal testing, and also with what I'm expecting to see, going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Please, ask questions in the comments, and I'll be down there to interact with you as always. And I'll catch you guys next time. Ciao.